This is a good bill. This is a balanced bill. It can pass the Senate.
Senator DUKAKIS, you may want to check that math. Actually, you're the only person that's signed on to this bill so far. I don't know how you're getting to 60.
But he says it's good and it's balanced and it can pass. Which one of those attributes do you think is most important? Top line starts right now.
Hello and welcome to ABCNews.com's Top Line. I'm David Chalian.
And I'm Rick Klein.
Each weekday, we're bringing you the latest political headlines, reporting, insight, analysis, everything you need and want to know about politics.
And we only get 15 minutes on the air, but you get all day long at twitter.com/thenOte. Let us know what you think.
Not yet quite a father, sir? Get us started. What is your top line?
Not yet. Gang of one. Senator Max Baucus doesn't have a lot of takers on his health care plan. This was the much-anticipated proposal that he put forward yesterday. No Republicans yet have signed on, and Democrats very lukewarm. Although, as President Obama makes the case out in College Park, Maryland today, this does seem like it's the likeliest framework, even though there isn't a lot of support.
But the problem is, there is no support on either side right now. The president, as you said, becomes this negotiator now. I mean, he has to bring these senators one by one down to the White House and try to figure out, yes, from this framework, how he gets to piece this all back together again. We're at the very beginning of that process. We're nowhere near the end of it. Star Wars. Yes, you remember missile defense? I know it's a blowback almost to the Cold War here, but Barack Obama today announced a shift in America's strategy with missile defense. This is quite key. It's a total shift from what the Bush administration had proposed, and it looks like it's a bit of deal-making with Russia. The president has said, listen, we're still caring about our allies in Poland and the Czech Republic, but we need to do a smarter, swifter, and a modern way of missile defense against the Iranian threat. He thinks that they don't have long-range missiles, and therefore our missile defense system should be restructured in a way against the threat that he sees exists. But it sounds to me like he's looking for Russian cooperation on Iran sanctions.
And all that may be true, but it seems like the White House did an abysmal job in preparing the political world for this. This blindsided the White House reporters. It blindsided members of Congress who were not briefed on this. This seemed to come out of nowhere in terms of the timing.
And we've seen already the Republicans going to politicize this. John McCain already way out in front, very disappointed with it.
Indeed. Senator DUKAKIS in Massachusetts, things are moving quite along at full speed right now to fill Ted Kennedy's seat on a temporary basis, and it seems like attention is turning to former Governor Michael Dukakis, who is particularly coy in a brief interview with the Boston Globe. He's normally a garrulous fellow. This time he says, I don't know anything and I don't want to talk about anything. It would seem like he was the logical choice, a capstone to a lifelong Massachusetts resident, someone who would come in for a couple of months and cast some votes on health care.
One of those instances where silence really is golden. And finally, avoiding race. It is quite clear that the White House has no interest in engaging on this discussion of race that has emerged after the Joe Wilson shouting out at the president last week. And President Carter really sought to put it front and center. And Robert Gibbs, the White House press secretary, went to the podium yesterday front and center and said, we disagree with President Carter entirely. We do not believe a majority of people who oppose the president do so on the basis of race, and doesn't want to engage on it.
And Valerie Jarrett saying today, go back and read the president's speech on race. It was a good speech last year in the middle of the Reverend Wright thing, but there isn't going to be another one.
We're going to begin with the healthcare debate and that Baucus bill that got dropped with a loud thud yesterday up on Capitol Hill. We're joined by Senator Judd Gregg, Republican of New Hampshire. Senator, thank you for being here. Every time I have the chance to talk to you, my mind immediately goes to, here's sort of a green eyeshade guy. I mean, if this thing is deficit neutral, then maybe this is something that you can get on board with. And Max Baucus says it is. He says it actually helps reduce the deficit. Aren't costs your biggest concern, and therefore do you see a bill here that could perhaps woo you on board?
No. You've got to look at the numbers. You've got to look behind the numbers. This is a $1.6 trillion expansion of the government over a 10-year period. That's a massive growth in the size of the government. How is it paid for? Well, the representation is that it's going to be paid for with about $1 trillion of new taxes and about $700 billion or $800 billion of reductions in Medicare spending. Now, we know that Congress isn't going to reduce Medicare spending by $800 billion, especially under the proposals that have been put on the table in this bill. And secondly, it leaves out a very significant expenditure item that we know we're going to have to undertake, which is the reimbursement of physicians. So really, it isn't funded, in my opinion. It is going to end up being a massive expansion of the government, which will intrude in people's lives significantly in the area of health care and their delivery of health care, but equally significantly, it will lead to significant increases in our debt.
Senator, I take that point, and I understand what you're saying, but the CBO looks at this, they do say that it's deficit neutral, actually
well, yeah,
some
because
savings.
they have to say that,
You're saying
because
there's no
they have
political
to
will for
agree
this
with
one.
the assumptions. And the assumption is you're going to cut, in this bill, the assumption is you're going to raise taxes by $1 trillion, and you're going to cut Medicare rate of growth, I suppose is the best way to put it, by about $800 billion. Well, that's not going to happen. You know, I mean, it's just simply not going to happen.
You look at some other components of this bill. There's no employer mandates in this bill. There's no public option in this bill. And again, it spends quite a bit less than the other proposals, even if you're skeptical about deficit neutrality. Given that, I mean, it seems to a lot of folks that there's no way to get Republicans on board. This seems to go pretty far to the right. A lot of liberals are unhappy with this.
Well, first off, I congratulate Senator DUKAKIS for taking a shot at this. And I congratulate him for the way he did it, by having folks meet from both sides of the aisle and go over the substance and really do a very in-depth attempt to try to deal with this. And there is some very good policy in this bill, which I agree to and support. I think the best way to do this really, though, is not with a massive attempt to fix everything at once, where you basically will have all sorts of unintended consequences. I think one of the unintended consequences of his bill is that a lot of people will migrate from their present private insurance, because they'll lose it, companies will simply stop offering it, over to some other type of insurance that they may not be quite so happy with. And you will also have a Medicaid event here, which is going to put tremendous pressure on the states by expanding Medicaid by 20 million people. Rather than having that occur by doing this broad brush attempt, let's take some steps that we know we can do and accomplish those steps, especially in the area of cost containment and in the area of identifying the constituencies who are uninsured and trying to give them some options, without doing a massive rewrite of our whole healthcare system, which is going to probably not be very well accepted and may have some very significant unintended consequences.
Right. I want to turn your attention, Senator, for a moment to the news of the day and the president's announcement about a strategy shift on missile defense in Europe as it pertains to the Iranian threat. This is something that he no longer believes needs to be what the Bush administration had proposed, and he's responding to what he says is new evidence about what the Iranian threat actually is. Do you think this shift in missile defense is the right approach?
Yes, but it wasn't handled very well. I guess he didn't really tell the Polish government or the Czech government until late last night, and that was really a major diplomatic error. You know, we heard about how this administration was going to be so much more adept at handling diplomacy, but it turns out in one of the first major diplomatic actions that they've taken, they were told they just didn't handle it well at all. You just don't say to two countries who have stood up and said, we're willing to do this after considerable cajoling from us, that you're going to walk away from them and give them, you know, like 12 hours notice that you're going to announce this. It was not well handled. But I do think from a substance standpoint, that it probably makes sense.
Tell us why, because some Republicans today, Senator McCain in particular, coming out and saying that this takes us backwards. Senator Lieberman also saying that this is a dangerous move for us. Why do you think this is the right one?
Well, I've actually was there when this was announced. I was actually in Poland and had just been in the Ukraine, and that was a few years ago actually. And at the time I had questions about it. First, because I'm not sure that this type of defensive system, at first it's going to be extremely expensive, but second, I'm not sure it's going to actually deal with the problem. We're not sure what the Iranians have, and to just simply go forward with a long-range, with the attempt to identify long-range missiles launches and then be able to respond to them, I really don't know that that's the threat. And I don't think anybody knows that that's a threat, and I think it's a very expensive answer to maybe a threat that doesn't exist at this point. Now, the Iranians are a huge problem for us. There's no question about that, and their movement towards a nuclear weapon is a huge problem for everyone. But whether or not we need to put in place long-range missile defense capability in Eastern Europe is something I have had serious reservations about.
Senator Judd Gregg, thank you very much, sir, for being here today. We greatly appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Sure, take care. Don't go anywhere, folks. More Top Line with Politico's Jonathan Martin in just a moment.